my name's Bridie. Welcome along to, maybe you're at your mat right now, or maybe you're thinking about getting on your mat. And what I'll be working with you on today is a split focus. Some of the focus is around breath work and where we breathe into different segments and parts of us in our thorax. So that's how we'll start. And then towards the end of the sequence, we're going to think about a few bony landmarks, some anatomical landmarks, arms and hips. I'll cue us into that a little later on. And then essentially it's a bit of connecting the dots. So just trying to swivel, spin, curl and tuck different parts of our anatomy in different directions towards each other. So what you'll see that I've got here is this, I think it's called a Hoverman sphere. And it is a special type of description or imagery that I like to use around breath. This is a common little tool or piece of equipment to just accentuate or shine a light on the idea about our breath living in 360 degrees, or the full circle, the round of us. So as this little device expands, we could think about this being our inhale. So it's sort of the contents of the thoracic cavity expands out, up and below, pushing down into the abdomen, up into the top of the shoulders, and then out into the sides of the ribs. This is not as fluid as our breath, but when we exhale, there's sort of this drawing back in, and the shape of this ball, this sphere, starts to go back in as well. Inhaling, we expand. Exhaling, we deflate, shrink, or contract it. So what I'll do is it's just a few rounds with breath. Again, it doesn't move as fluidly, maybe as we breathe, but the sense, the visualization is here. So all breath out, empty the breath. Inhale, as you inflate, can you imagine your ribs, your lungs pushing and expanding out in all directions, up, down, back, sides. Exhaling in your own way, the sense of deflating, drawing in, contracting. Last full breath in and out. So where we move to next is we're going to take this idea of breathing in the round, 360 breath, do one more seated breath manipulation, and then we'll just do 3 yoga shapes that point our attention into specific places. So what you'll need next is a strap, a scarf, anything band-like to wrap around the body. You'll take your strap, you don't need too much length, just enough to wrap around the circumference of sort of your widest part of your rib cage. So somewhere high underneath the armpits or the back of the shoulders, maybe across the nipple line. This is a suggestion, a place to start, but feel free to go above or below based on what you're feeling. You'll let your elbows hang, so soft upper shoulders. Preference here might be to turn the palms up, and you'll notice what I've done is crossed which hand is holding the strap, so I'm able to just gently tug and cinch across the body. And gentle is the underlying word here. not looking to really cinch, but just enough tactile feedback that you get a sense of your ribs moving out and in. And so for this exercise here, we're tuning our focus, our attention, the space that we feel the breath, into the outer borders of the sides. So this is like a lateral expansion outwards, and then a medial deflation inwards. And all you're doing is using the borders of the strap to inhale, pushing the ribs out into the strap. And then maybe using just that slight overpressure to help the ribs draw in towards each other or down. Inhaling, the ribs rotate up, out and away. Exhaling, the ribs close back down and in. 3 or 4 more like this. Last round. So sticking with this inquiry, what we'll do is stack 3 poses now. Each are varied, and each point your attention to your breath in a different place. So where we're going to start is pretty simple, lying on our back with comfortable legs. So you'll be face up. If you've got something, your hands work just fine as a little weight to place on your lower belly, then you might grab something. I'm going to use a blanket and my hands. So I'm someone that's comfortable with bent knees, feet on the floor, and I'm placing some kind of prop over the lower abdomen. Do anything that you need to do as you settle down, especially if you're one of these people that like to hug your knees in. Rock from side to side. And then all your attention and the movement of the breath is going to start to be pointed down to this lower abdomen. Traditionally, this is described as a belly breath, which works for the felt experience, but it's not really an accurate description of the mechanics of the breath. But it's called a belly breath because we feel it very much in the front of us. And what's happening as we inhale is there's a sense of the inhalation happening in the lower thoracic cavity, so that it's like pushing down on the abdominal cavity. And there's that sense of the stuff in the abdominal area just starting to open or push out. So there's this sense of expansion and then the sense of deflation. And you'll use your hands or your prop to give you, again, just like the strap and the ribs, the sense of what the lower abdomen should be gently expanding into and away from. Without the prop, it's just the environment. When we're working on this belly breathing, it's easy at times to find it supine face up as opposed to sitting. Here on the floor, we can let some of these postural muscles just ease slightly. And so we're wanting this breath to feel relaxed-ish, not too effortful. And what we're going to do now is contrast this with rolling over and lying on our tummies, where we'll do a bit of integration and then a second shape. So, but already as you roll over, you get the contrast of the lesson. If you need to do anything on your way to rolling over on your front, feel free. And I'm going to place a blanket underneath my face and my arms just for a bit of softness, so you might like that. And then you'll set yourself up in some kind of prone position, face down, either stacked palms, forehead resting on back of hands. Maybe you go one ear to the side, whatever's more comfortable in your neck. And just try the belly breath here and notice what you notice. Here with the front of the abdomen on the floor, less room to actually move and descend out into space. And maybe your attention becomes a bit more in the lower back, the back of the body. So if you were to breathe into the lower spine, again, it's similar to belly breathing where it gives us a nice description, but it might not actually be accurate. Well, it's not accurate to our mechanics. But think about being here and allowing the breath to fill the lower back space. And the hint is that you might still be using the same skill that you were cultivating before on your belly. You just feel the movement in a different place. Now, contrast that with coming into a back bend where we close down the lower back space, start to tug on the front stuff, and the belly's still on the floor. So the hint for this one is that the breath is invited to live in the chest. So we're going to come up into a Sphinx variation. All I'm looking for is you to be up in an arch spine. So what you might feel better with is taking your elbows further away from the ribs to lessen the arch or to bring them closer towards. And if you were really gung-ho, you could pop yourself into a seal where you're lifting the elbows off the floor. Halfway point, nice comfortable point, is to have the elbows relatively under the shoulders. Notice the compression in the lower back, the compression of the front of the belly on the floor, and notice where the breath lives. In shapes like this, the head can become quite a factor. So I always encourage movement of the head just as you notice it's starting to grip, hold, or get heavy. A nice alternative, I'm already in it, but a nice alternative is maybe you set yourself up with a block so that your forehead can just rest. Otherwise, staying still or just moving out the tension in the neck and the shoulders as you witness it. We'll be here for a few more breaths. Remember, this is about breathing into the upper chest. Last round, in and out. Coming into our third, final breath awareness shape. It's going to be a child's pose, preferably that traditional child's pose where you've got your knees together, but you'll find whatever works for you. So hands underneath the shoulders to push yourself up, and what you'll do ideally is go in a closed kneeling position, hips back to heels, arms around beside you, and forehead down on the floor or the block. What I'm looking for is a feeling of feedback of belly on thighs, so if you're not getting that, you might take something and fill the space. A blanket's a really nice option. And this is to sort of add or contrast the feeling that I'd like of a rounded spine, a stretched or an open back body. And rather now than just breathing into the lower back, can you take your attention into the whole back of the spine, but mostly it's the top of the shoulders, the middle of the back, and drawing down to this belly button space. Can you visualize where your belly button space would be on the back of your spine? And as you're here, just linger a few moments longer. We're staying in this idea of breathing 360, breathing into the sides, the front, the top, and the bottom of the breath. And this sequence may have gotten you a little more interested in the mechanics. So you're always welcome to jump on the internet, find a few articles, YouTube videos, anything that starts to describe what's actually happening in these mechanics, what's going on when we say things like breathing into back space or lower belly space. Right, we're going to change tact a little. We're doing a few more drills, so to speak, so they won't be particularly flowy. We'll just do chunk, 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 but they're really intended to help you cement this breath work and starting to think about anatomical parts of you. So we're going to use a massage ball just in the beginning. A foam roller could work, or just anything to help you feel. And where we're going to feel is the outside of the hips. If I had a skeleton, I'd point out where we're at, but essentially what I'd like you to find is what's called the greater trochanter. And this is the kind of widest point of the leg bones that are hanging off the pelvis. So this is the sides of the hips. Less where we go hands on hips at the top of the pelvis, more like you slide on down, and we're actually finding this sort of hip ball and socket, so to speak. The ball and socket's deep, we don't quite get there, but we get the end of the neck coming out to the side. And so you'll grab a little massage ball, end up in a side sitting position, and you'll side sit. I'm going to lean off towards the left, so I'm sitting on my left hip, left with my left hand on the floor. I'm mirroring, so it's actually right. And then you're going to need to be able to lift yourself off the floor into a side plank variation-ish. So with stacked knees, I feel okay pushing into hands, pushing into bottom leg, and lifting hip up. If that's tricky for you for wrist or shoulder stuff, you might try with a few stacked blocks and your forearm on the floor instead, so that you're still able to push down and lift up. Now, before you do it, this can be very strong very quickly. So you're looking to hover the weight off the ball as much as possible and just very gently maneuver yourself. Sometimes I describe this feeling as like it's one big knuckle protruding or sticking out from the thigh. So what you might feel is that there's a specific bony point that you get the ball on, and then you're able to rock off side to side, above and below. So again, we start to think about the circumference of, this time it's the landmark as opposed to the breadth, but still the sense of exploring the round, the whole shape of it. So I'm in a side lying position, lifting up and getting the ball underneath the hip. Now, generally speaking, this is going to be, you'll be in the right spot. Just trust yourself a little bit here. And it's not bad as long as it feels good. The sense that I want you to have is a sense of translating the pelvis forwards. So the ball rolls back more into the side of the glutes and the bum, and then pushing the pelvis back so that the ball rolls forwards into the front of the greater trochanter and more in the front of the beginning of the hip flexors. and then you can lift yourself up slightly so that the ball rolls down, and push yourself down so that the ball rolls up. And you'll just go in and around. And the feeling, hopefully, is that as you're going in all these directions, you're kind of climbing over a little mound and dropping off and lifting up on. Awesome. Not do it for too long, it's just to get the sort of tactile feedback, and then we'll switch sides. So just check that the same rules apply on this side, your side sitting, and just enough to lift the hips off to get the ball underneath. You're looking for that feeling of, sometimes it feels like you're definitely on a bone, and then I'd like you to feel that you're moving your pelvis enough that you do have that clear transition of when you're off the sort of bony landmark, so to speak, and more on the tissue. The top of the hip, the bum, and the front of the hip, and below. So thinking about arrows extending out in all these directions. Okay. So this is the beginning of it. Here is our greater trochanter, these sides of hips. Sides of the femur, the thigh bones. The part that anchors the legs to the pelvis. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just lie on down again. We're going to be on our backs with bent knees again. Don't need the ball. We're just going to do some pretty simple swishing. So allow the upper body to become heavy. You might spread the arms to help anchor you down. And then you're just going to, maybe starting with feet really close together, knowing that you can grow out over time, begin to swish the knees from side to side. And as we're doing this, we're referencing the greater trochanter on each side. So as you roll over to one side, one greater trochanter points down to the floor while the other one points up in the direction of the sky. And what I'm hoping you find at the beginning is allowing the rest of the spine and the upper body to sort of come with to get the most range that you can find. So it's really thinking about directing greater trochanter up, greater trochanter down. And as you get comfortable with this, just take the feet further apart, and you could let the legs move individually. So one kind of leads the movement, lifting up, out, and away, while the other leg drops in and down. Always thinking about the trochanter. Okay. And then next up, the last kind of lesson here is to connect greater trochanter with elbows, and this then turns into spinal curling and rounding. So your elbow, we're going to think about our olecranon process. So this is that kind of pointy part of the elbow. When you bend it, you might touch the end. It's on the back side of the arm. And at first, we're just going to connect knee to elbow. So this is kind of a natural and obtainable idea. And then we're just going to stretch it out a bit more by trying to get elbow to hip, which is a little harder, a bit more arbitrary, but maybe makes the curl a bit tighter. So you're going to take one elbow and connect it to the opposite knee by gently curling up into a little quarter crunch and then tucking the opposite knee in. I'm using the other hand to just stabilize as required, and just for a moment linger here, push, push, pushing. In with the leg, in with the hand. Nice, lower on down, and then just go into the other side. Olecranon to knee. Awesome. Now that we've got these points in our mind's eye, you're going to go into a setup like you're lying on the beach, so hands behind head, interlaced with wide elbows. If this doesn't feel good, you can always go into cactus arms. If your range is limited, it's no big deal, just work in the range that you've got, or find some bolster or a few blocks so that you can rest with your arms up in the air. Otherwise, you're finding backs of hands on the floor or hands behind head. Okay. We'll do a few curling forwards. So you're trying here to curl elbows up towards the ceiling, tuck chin into chest, and scoop. And the idea is to think about these greater trochanters. They're anchored down into the floor, and can you curl yourself up towards them? Pushing into the feet to get that curl, crunch, 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 and eventually trying to get there, not in this lifetime for me, and down. And just repeat that twice more. So I'm looking for the effort, the tone, the feeling that you're working, and the intention to connect the dots. Greater trochanter to olecranon, same side. Okay? Go once more. Nice, we'll take a little pit stop from that work with our twists. So this time, same twisting movement with the legs, but we're going to invite the elbows to stay plugged down. In fact, can you use the outside musculature of your shoulders to push your elbows down into the floor? So you're anchored, anchored, anchored. And then you're going to reach that same side, greater trochanter, away. Twisting up. So just a few rounds of this twist where you're applying a bit more overpressure with the upper body and limiting what happens here. Okay? And then we're going to go into curling knees towards elbows. So you're going to do a little bit of both, and then we're going to try and get greater trochanter to elbows, which is just sort of going to be rocking around in a wonky way. So I don't expect you to do a perfect curl, but you'll start to tuck your knees in and just notice what it's like to go knees in and down, knees in and down. And then eventually think what you need to do to get your hips to your elbows. And I'm looking for a bit of a butt lift here. So can you curl in enough to get your sort of feet over your head and lift your bum up to the sky? And then you're going to bring in that curling sense with the upper chest as well. So you're trying to curl in. There's this hike in the hips. And you're staying curled through the upper body while you're trying to curl the lower body in. So it's kind of a knees to face. Maybe a few more times. It feels fatiguing for my lower abdomen. So maybe you use that breath space of breathing into the lower belly. A few more, just enough so you feel that kind of fatigue burn feeling. And then have a rest. Thinking about elbows to greater trochanter, we're going to roll up through a bit of a curl. So the hands stay behind the head if that works. Swish the legs from side to side. And in your own way, you're going to move through one side line. So I'll move towards the camera. So tipping the knees off to one side. Push the same side elbow down into the floor. And you're going to then scoop and kind of tuck in the opposite elbow. So it's going to draw it in towards you. And there's that sense of just curling over or rounding on your side. And notice that that top greater trochanter comes with as well. Nice. Up to you now what your transition is from here. Maybe you place your hand down on the floor and push yourself up. Or maybe you bring your, that's the way to do it. Push yourself up. Wonderful.